Yeah, I know what they're going to be doing. They're going to be terrorizing middle-class Americans, terrorizing small business owners. I think farmers right now have a giant target on their back, and that's especially true for small farmers, small ranchers, and the farmers and the ranchers. I think really right now are in the crosshairs more so than almost anybody.
To start off, why don't you tell me about who you are? You've won awards as a journalist. You run the Liberty Sentinel. And you're also an author of several books. And from my understanding, you've been banned from Facebook as well. So
yeah, so I'm a journalist. I write for a lot of different publications. I have my own libertysentinel.org, and then I'm also a senior editor at the New American magazine, which is a national conservative-leaning publication. I'm a regular contributor to a lot of different publications, including the Epoch Times, which is now one of the largest newspapers in America after New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal. I did get banned from Facebook right after the election because I pointed out that something seemed really, really suspicious when, I went to bed and it looked like Trump was massively ahead. And then I woke up and suddenly they had found all these mysterious votes in conveniently all the states where they needed to be found. So I just pointed that out on Facebook and I got banned. And they left me banned for about a week. And they said, if you want to challenge this decision, you've got to like scan your ID and file this thing. I said, whatever, I don't care about Facebook. I'm done. And then they restored my account about a week later. I think they just were really desperate to silence that narrative. And then once it looked like they had gotten it under control, then they said, all right, well, we'll bring these people back on because we need to keep spying on them and manipulating them and harvesting their data. So, I have won a lot of awards. I do a lot of other things as well. I write books. I've been an educator for the last 12 years. I've been teaching advanced economics to some of America's brightest high school seniors, serve on a lot of boards, preach at a lot of churches across the country. What else do I do? I'm the executive director of Public School Exit. It's a ministry. We're trying to get children out of government schools as quickly as possible. So we're working with families and churches all over the country and actually all over the world to try to make sure that the next generation gets a decent education. So that's kind of an overview of the things that I work on every day.
yeah, it's interesting. We've completely pulled our kids out of school. I mean, we kind of felt like we had to at this point in time. And you were talking about your reason for Facebook ban. I don't know if anybody's ever really pointed this out, but if you go to, I think there's an app, it's called Social Blade, and you look at certain channels over the time of the elections from August through about, midway into the next year, a lot of channels that were getting solid viewership just dropped off the face of the earth. And we were one of those for quite a period of time. And to me, it bothers me because I don't believe in the party system. I think it's kind of tearing our country apart. I think it promotes mass thinking and doesn't allow people to think for themselves. So I try and stay as biased as I can. I mean, I definitely have my own opinions and they come out, but that's just part of conversations. And on this kind of interview series that I do, I try and bring in people from all different perspectives. Generally, it's a perspective that, I'm looking for or I agree with in some fashion or another. But on that note, Donald Trump, when he was in office, I had some critical things to say about the way they handled agriculture, just like I do with the current administration. And he's not, for a lot of people, he's not their favorite politician. Part of that's because he's not a politician. But that's also the reason why I think a lot of people like him. But his dialogue turns a lot of people off. And I understand that. But when we look at something like what happened recently, the Mal raid, to me, it doesn't matter what you think about the guy. It was kind of an unprecedented raid by the FBI. And then they took Congressman Perry's phone. And then you see a lot of these other cases opening up over the elections down in Georgia, pulling in other people. And I feel like, it's reaching to the point now where we're starting to see these government agencies being utilized as a tool in an inappropriate way. And it makes you feel a little uncomfortable as a citizen in the United States. And one of the big things that I see that I think impacts our audience in the agricultural community is this current bill that was just signed for the anti-inflation bill. I don't know how it exactly reduces inflation. I haven't been able to figure that out from reading it. You know, let's pump 750 million in more into the economy. It's interesting. It took us 200 and some odd years to get up to $6 trillion. In just a few months, we were able to add $6 trillion to it. But we wonder where inflation came from. But anyway, in that bill, they've got $80 billion hiring armed agents for the IRS. What do you think they're going to be doing with that? That's almost 2,000 agents per state on top of what they already have.
Yeah, I know what they're going to be doing. They're going to be terrorizing middle-class Americans. They're going to be terrorizing small business owners. They're going to be terrorizing conservative organizations, Christian ministries. And how do I know they're going to do that? Because that's what they've been doing, right? That's what they specialize in. The billionaire class, they're laughing all the way to the bank. They hardly pay any taxes. They hide all their gargantuan fortunes in these tax-exempt foundations. And then these tax-exempt foundations own yachts and penthouses and private jets. And so they laugh at us and they advocate for higher taxes. They say, oh, it's crazy that I pay less taxes than the middle class. We should have higher taxes. And of course, they never pay those higher taxes. They just continue to put their fortunes into these tax-exempt foundations. So it's very clear what this is for. I think it's an effort to try to extract as much money as possible, try to make life as difficult as possible for people who are not in sync with the regime. And incidentally, I agree with everything you said about the two-party system, the persecution of Trump. I had some serious disagreements with him while he was president, and I spoke out about them loud and clear. The USMCA I thought was a disaster for a number of reasons, most importantly for surrendering so much American sovereignty, even worse than NAFTA. But I liked many of the things that Trump did as well. And I think the reason why they're targeting him is the same reason why they're hiring all these IRS agents. They want to clamp down on the opposition, and those that they can't silence, those that they can't intimidate, they want to tie up in never-ending audits. They want to tie up in never-ending legal proceedings. And we've seen all this, right? It was only a few years ago that the IRS got caught red-handed persecuting conservative organizations. They were going through the list of 501c3 applications, and anybody that had conservative or Tea Party or Patriot or anything like that was getting extra scrutiny, was getting held up, was getting investigated. So I guarantee you that's what they're going to be doing this time. And you talk to anybody who has dealt with the IRS, and what you'll find is it's really a total reversal of what the American system of justice is supposed to be based on. We're all supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. And yet when you're dealing with the IRS, it's exactly the opposite. You are guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And even if you can prove yourself innocent, it's no guarantee that they're not going to bankrupt you, that they're not going to destroy your business, that they're not going to destroy your life. They did it to my grandma. My grandma raised 8 kids on her own, worked 2 jobs. They went back and said, oh, well, you owe us $2,000 from whatever it was 20 years ago. We're going to assess an insane amount of fees and taxes. And so they put a lien on the poor lady's house. She's an old lady, retired, couldn't buy medicine, couldn't get her dog to the vet because the IRS sucked every penny except 1 penny. They left 1 penny in her account, sucked it out of her bank account. They put a lien on her house. When some of her kids would try to send her money, the IRS would suck that right out of there too. They never do that to the Rockefellers, to the George Soroses, to the Michael Bloombergs, because they've got armies of attorneys and because that's not who they're really after. So we're headed into, I think, a very dark time in American history. The country that was created by our founders is increasingly just becoming a memory. But I don't think we can let that be the last chapter. We have to stay active, and we have to keep defending what's good and exposing and resisting what's evil. So
I did a video, it was over a year ago now, talking about some of the tax legislation, since we're talking about the IRS, that the current administration was trying to push out there, taxing people on the active value of their businesses, their land and things like that. And when you look at somebody like a farmer, for example, they could have land, especially right now with the way they've been driving prices up with inflation, that's worth millions of dollars. It doesn't mean that person has that money. There's no way they could possibly pay a yearly tax on that, income tax wise, they're already paying property taxes. But when you look at, all of their equipment, and there's a lot of stuff that they already tax. So this was kind of expanding on that. And now you've got a lot of talk about carbon banks and carbon taxes. And was the SEC wanted corporations to start reporting downline emissions, which would include farmers who they're getting products from cotton to food, all of that. Do you kind of foresee, if any of this stuff ends up getting passed going down the line, this army of IRS agents impacting the welfare of farmers?
Oh, there's no question about it. I think farmers right now have a giant target on their back. And that's especially true for small farmers, small ranchers, independent producers. The big corporate operations, they're not in any danger from this. The people that they're going after are the small farmers and the small ranchers. And I know many of them. I have a little bit of my own cattle. I've got a little bit of agricultural land, a fruit orchard and things, more of a hobby than making a living. But I know a lot of people who are involved in agriculture, and almost every single one of them is facing some sort of attack from the government, whether it's, trying to take away their water rights, trying to tax them out of existence. And, Karl Marx had this idea that you had to stop the accumulation of wealth from generation to generation. And family farms are one of the ways that happens, right? If your great-great-great-grandpa settled the land back in the 1800s and, it wasn't worth anything at the time, and each generation it gets more and more valuable, suddenly you're sitting on a farm that's worth many millions of dollars. And then, the farmer dies and tries to pass that on to their kids. And it's the same thing with small businesses too. You start a small business, you work hard, you build up a business that maybe the business with all of its assets, all of its equipment, its trucks, whatever, is worth 10, 20, 30 million dollars. Then what happens is the IRS comes in and says, well, now you need to hand over the death tax, right? Which after the exclusion, I think is 50%, if I'm not mistaken, or close to it. What happens is then that farmer has to sell off part of his land, part of his farm. That business owner has to sell off the business. And so what happens is you interrupt the transmission of wealth from one generation to the next. Now, the elites, they know how to get around this. They've got gazillions of dollars to spend on specialized tax accountants. They own the politicians, so they make sure there's loopholes in there for them. And what they do, look at what Bill Gates did, right? He put all his shares of Microsoft into the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's what George Soros did, right? His company is owned essentially by the tax exempt foundation that he's got, the Open Society Foundation. So that's what they do. They're really targeting small and medium sized producers, and the farmers and the ranchers, I think, really right now are in the crosshairs more so than almost anybody, because there is an agenda to get control of the food supply. There is an agenda to destroy independent food producers, and they'll use whatever means necessary, whether that's the pretending to save some desert tortoise or some lizard or some cockroach, or protecting some sort of environment or habitat, or coming after emissions, or coming after alleged taxes owed. They really don't care what they use to destroy the small farmers, but they do want to destroy them. They do want to get them out of the way. And by the way, this is not a uniquely American phenomenon. This is happening all over the world. They're sometimes using different excuses and different pretexts for destroying small and medium-sized farmers, but the same thing is happening all over the planet. China, South Africa, Brazil, Holland, you name it, farmers are in the crosshairs.
When you look at this massive army of the IRS that's going to be bigger than any, I think it's going to be bigger than the Pentagon, the several agencies combined, Border Patrol. These are a lot of people carrying guns. They're armed. The IRS had 5 million rounds of ammunition, and they just recently spent another 750 million on rounds of ammunition, if I'm correct on that, which is a lot of ammunition. Now, I realize some of it's probably specialized for their submachine guns, but when you look at, if people aren't aware of armed raids from agents from these agencies, if you were to look at there was an Amish dairy farm that was raided by the ATF for no charges were ever pressed against the guy that I'm aware of, but he had about 300 to 600 long guns that he was selling to other people within their community to hunt. And then I believe the FDA has raided several raw food establishments, one in Southern California, and another Amish dairy farm in Pennsylvania. They're going in there with guns, doing these raids. And I don't know if they're afraid that they're going to get milked or what the situation is, but it seems like they're giving, the government has this massively unfair advantage over what they're sending their agents into to implement or to enforce what seems like a rather harmless act by these folks. There was also a raid on an Amish meat farmer for selling meat to his constituents who, in that circle was more of a, they're wanting to buy meat sourced a certain way for religious reasons.
I mean, it's a massive overreach. The Constitution, I encourage people to read the Constitution. Don't just take my word for it. The Constitution is a very simple document. It was written so that the people could understand it. And, what you really need to know about the Constitution, it outlines the authorities and the responsibilities of the federal government. Obviously, because all legislative powers are reserved to Congress, you'll find that in Article 1, where the powers of Congress are listed. And if you go to Section 8 of Article 1, you'll see the authorities that Congress has. And nowhere in that list of authorities will you see any power to pass laws involving ranching, farming, dairy, whether you need to pasteurize, whether you need to get all these permits. That none of that is a federal responsibility. I mean, they're allowed to have a post office, a Navy, copyright and intellectual property office. They've got a very, very small list of things that they're allowed to do. And then just in case it wasn't crystal clear, I mean, all the founding fathers thought it was very obvious, right? If it's not listed here, it's not a power of the federal government. There's no chance they're ever going to usurp that. And if they do, the states will resist. But just in case that wasn't clear enough and obvious enough, they actually went back when they added the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. In the 10th, they said all powers not delegated to the United States. In other words, any powers that are not listed in this Constitution as responsibilities of the federal government, any powers that we did not surrender in this Constitution to the federal government, are reserved for the states or for the people. And that includes virtually everything that you just described and so many other things. So by definition, this is an overreach of immense proportions. None of these things should be happening. If the American people decide, hey, we really do need the federal government to regulate farmers. Hey, we really do need the federal government to regulate food or whatever it is. We have a process for that. It's called a constitutional amendment. And we have two ways to get constitutional amendments. And we've done this many times in our history. The Constitution's been amended more than 20 times. So it's possible to do. It's difficult to do for obvious reasons. We don't want to just wake up one morning and just all be passionate about something and then pass a really stupid amendment. But if we think about it and we consider it, we did it with alcohol prohibition. The federal government obviously didn't have power to prohibit alcohol, so we passed an amendment giving them that power. We realized pretty quickly that was a stupid idea, so then we revoked that power in a subsequent amendment. But that's the process if we want the government to do these things. And I don't think that most Americans want the government to do these things, certainly not enough to get a constitutional amendment passed. So all of this, as far as I'm concerned, is lawlessness. It's overreach. It shouldn't be happening. And I'm a little bit encouraged by what's happening at the Supreme Court in terms of starting to rein this stuff in. But we have a long way to go, and it's going to take a lot more cases and really the education of the American people before we can get back to a government that kind of behaves itself and follows the law.
Yeah, I agree with what you were just saying there about the Supreme Court as well, because you've seen a lot of decisions lately where they've just been saying, look, this isn't even in our jurisdiction. We shouldn't be ruling on it, pass it back to the states, which is, unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand what they're doing, but they're actually improving our rights by doing that. They're not restricting them at all.